for many, many years, decades, centuries, even in America, we have kind of taken for granted peaceful transfer of power between presidents. And then 3 years ago, last week, it was not so peaceful transferring between President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden. And now I think as we are now in 2024 and look forward to a year from now, another perhaps transfer of power or continuing on of another president's tenure, can we expect a peaceful time? Can we expect peace and ease? That is something that is in the anxieties and worries of many people in this country. That's what perhaps may bring us perspective as we continue on in 2 Samuel. That it is odd in the history of this country in America to see such riots and tension and violence between people who are reigning. It was all too tragically commonplace throughout most of human history. It was all too commonplace even in the transfer between King 1 and King 2 of Israel. So often in human history, when one person dies, there's always a battle for the throne. There's bloodshed for who will wear the crown. And even though God and his prophets and his priests are there from the very beginning of the kingship of Israel, there is still sin. They're still battling over who will reign over Israel, and we see it again here. God has chosen David to be king. King Saul has died. So you would say it is going to be a pretty easy transition, isn't it? Between Saul and David. Not so fast. Last week we saw David mourning over the death of Saul and Jonathan, really showing his kingly nature. But there are still many great fans of King Saul in the nation of Israel. And we'll see here, especially over the next 3 chapters, chapters 2, 3, 4, are really the story of how David finally gathered Israel together in peace. These are long chapters. We'll read all of chapter 2 today. I want you to really follow along and see the scenes before us. I think these Bible history books can kind of bog us down, but what we have today is a scene of grace, a scene of battle, and great bitter bloodshed. So follow along with me here in chapter 2 of 2 Samuel. After this, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." David said, "To which shall I go up?" And he said, "To Hebron." So David went up there, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And when they told David, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, "May you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed his loyalty to Saul, your Lord, and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong. Be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." But Abner, son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead and the Ashurites of Jezreel and Ephraim and Benjamin and all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And at that time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. They sat down, the one on the one side of the pool, the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise." Then they arose, passed over by number, 12 for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side. So they fell down together. Therefore that place was called Helkath Hazarim, which is at Gibeon. And the battle was very fierce that day. And Abner and the men of Israel beaten before the servants of David. And the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was as swift of foot as a wild gazelle. And Asahel pursued Abner, and as he went, he turned neither foot to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. Abner looked behind him and said, "Is it you, Asahel?" And he answered, "It is I." Abner said to him, "Turn aside to your right hand or to your left, and seize one of the young men and take his spoil." But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again to Asahel, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift my face to your brother Joab?" But he refused to turn aside. For Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out his back. And he fell there and died where he was. And all who came to that place where Asahel had fallen died stood still. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and the sun was going down. They came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Gilead, on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. And the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner and became one group, took their stand on top of a hill. And Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" And Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers until the morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight anymore. And Abner and his men went all the night through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, marching the whole morning. They came to Mahanaim. And Joab returned with them in pursuit of Abner. When we had gathered all the people together, there were missing from David's servants 19 men besides Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin 360 of Abner's men. And they took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was at Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke them upon them at Hebron. This is the word of the Lord. As a kid, I was amazed when I discovered the genre of books called choose your own adventure stories. Did you guys ever read? There's many other versions of this now, more digital format, but just actual like novels, books, where it's the story and it tells it in the second person, so you're in the story, putting you right there in it. And as you read, you turn to a page, and you, the character, is faced with a decision. And option A will take you to page 94. Option B will take you to page 56. Option C will take you to page 20. Which one do you choose? And as you read, you are faced with decisions again and again and again until you find how the story ends for you, the main character. It might mean that if you make all the right choices, you get the happy ending. Or you get the bitter ending of after your first choice, you get bitten by a snake and die. I remember reading one of those where my first choice, I get bitten by a snake and die. Happy end or bitter end? It's kind of the choice before you. It's fascinating when I would read those, because then after reading it a couple times, I would just kind of go through and seek out what all the different permutations of them are. And it was amazing how quickly that first choice would determine the way the rest of the story would go. Whatever was guiding you right in the beginning, that very first thing you do, what guided you, could spell the rest of the story for you. That those decisions in this choose your own adventure would really lay out all the things that were to come as if they're completely predetermined for you. As things begin for David here, you have two people making different choices. You have David making his choice. You have Abner making his. And I think our text quite clearly shows us the root of Abner's choices. That very first choice of deciding to rival against God's anointed has created this death spiral of bloodshed for so many people in all of Israel. Yet David's choice here is one that promotes loving kindness. And it's all because he seeks out the Lord first. Now, I've said many times before, my struggle with preaching through books like, 2 Samuel is it can be easy to make this all like, be like David, don't be like this bad guy, which is kind of how this text might present itself at first. Be like David, don't be like Abner. But I don't think it's as simple as trying to be a David here. What is David doing? What is he valuing? What guides him? As he sets out in the choose-your-own-adventure story of his life, what is guiding his choices? What is shaping his choices? As king, he is completely guided by God's kingship. He submits first and foremost to God's kingship, and see what that puts out for his life. And instead, Abner's choice, his first choice, is to be set up a rival to God's kingship. And what that creates is a bloody start and a bitter end. So let's survey these two different kings, King David, King Ishbosheth, but particularly the choices of David and how he's guided, and the choices of Abner and how he is guided. David is guided to submit to God's kingship. Right from the start, he asks, where do I go? The great question perhaps you've asked the Lord too before. Where do I go? What do I do? He asked, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said, go up. David said, to whom shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. And so there he goes, and there in verse 4, he is anointed king over the house of Judah, sent to Hebron. For all, Bible trivia, we're probably familiar with places like Jerusalem, like Bethlehem, right? Egypt. But what do you know about Hebron, right? What's so important about Hebron? God is directing them to Hebron, which is a small, seemingly insignificant place, but incredibly significant to the history of God's people. It was the site where God visited Abraham in the form of 3 visitors. The site where Sarah laughed when it was prophesied that she would have a son. Hebron is the place that Abraham would one day bury his wife, Sarah. It was the very first bit of the promised land that God had sent Abraham to that he owned. And think about that. God promised Abraham, you will go to this new land, it shall be yours. And where did God send him? The first bit he bought was Hebron, to bury his wife. And there he was buried. And there Isaac was buried. The place of Hebron is this burial place of the patriarchs, this kind of first moment for the patriarchs. It's, as I think about it, is the Plymouth Rock of Israel. The arrival of the English pilgrims to begin a mighty nation for their children, small, insignificant. If you go in Massachusetts today to Plymouth, you see those like really strange looking just rock surrounded by, in this kind of well, and they've preserved it as this symbol. Why preserve that mark? Well, imagine a presidential candidate declaring their candidacy. I mean, often when candidates declare their candidacy, it's a big press moment. They want their picture taken. They want this big momentous thing. And so what would a candidate be saying if they announced their candidacy at Plymouth Rock? It is a calling back to some of the first European settlers of America. It would have a very it could also maybe even have a religious element to that kind of statement, right? Because that's what these separatistic Puritans came to do, right? To find their own freedom of faith there. It would send its own kind of message, right? Declaring there at Plymouth Rock this kind of symbol of the beginning of the country. And that is what David is doing. He is, by God sending him there, there's a call back to what? Not just the burial place of some patriarchs. But again, remember what that means. The first place that Abraham got to own of that promised land. David, by going to Hebron, is calling back to God's promises, isn't he? It is calling back to see how God fulfilled his promise to Abraham to be a blessing and see where we will go. I'm going to anchor my reign as King David just right now over the house of Judah, which is a small step, small, seemingly insignificant, but God will fulfill his promises to his people. He is guided and shaped by God's promises. But even more so, we see not only that David is looking back to God's promises, but presently, he is being shaped by God's character and kingship as well. He hears of these men who risked their lives for Saul, who buried the body of Saul, these men of Jabesh Gilead. Here comes the enemy of Saul, the new king, right? David, the one who was pursued by Saul, chased by Saul, an enemy of Saul. And now these men of Jabesh Gilead who buried the body of Saul, they see the rival king, now the new king coming towards them. How will he deal with them? The surprising thing about this, deals with them with mercy. He blesses them. These men, this is a call back to 1 Samuel chapter 11. At the beginning of Saul's reign, he rescued the people of Jabesh Gilead. He defended them. He protected them. He saved their lives. And so when Saul dies, these men go out and save the body from continual shame and humiliation. The body of Saul they rescue and bury. They show honor. They show love for their former king. And now the new king comes and shows to them that same love, that same goodness that they showed their king. There are what David says to them. He recognizes how they dealt with them. When they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, "May you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong, be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. May you be blessed by the Lord because you showed this loyalty, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you." You know, there are a few just Hebrew and Greek words that are just good to know, and I try not to do too much over teaching of that, but there's a few good ones just to keep, tucked away and saved there. I think one of the most important Hebrew words is the word chesed. Chesed. It is that word that we come along when we see things like loyalty, your loyalty to Saul. Steadfast love, that is a very common translation of it. Steadfast love. Or loving kindness. English has many different attempts at trying to translate it because it means a bunch of different things. It's one word that sums up so much. And honestly, one of my favorite is really Sally Lloyd-Jones' translation. She's the writer of Jesus Storybook Bible. We every now and then at nights we read to Lila from adaptation of Psalm 23, the little storybook to her of that, and it ends with her translation of it, which I love. It is God's never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. God's never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. You see what's all in there as it goes on. That's the steadfast part. It's never giving up or unbreaking. That means it's bound in covenant promise. God will do this thing. He will hold his love to you because he has made his promise. And his word is sure, and he doesn't change from it. It is always and it is forever. It is unchanging. It's love. But love is not enough to describe it. We need to put on that covenant loving, that kindness, that unchanging, unstopping. And that is what David sees in the lives of the men of Jabesh Gilead. He sees you men have been shaped by God's chesed love. And I want you to know, because you've shown that God will continue to show his chesed love to you. And David, by blessing them in this way, is also expressing, I will rule with that chesed love. I mean, that's a pretty big kind of definition of a covenant love that's unbreaking, unchanging. How are any of us capable of that? unless we are truly guided and shaped by the kingship of God, who reigns over, but who also loves us with that same kind of chesed, unchanging love. That is the kind of king that we see in this first part. And then we see another person. Not another king per se. We see, yes, Ishbosheth, another king, but who is propped up as almost a puppet by Abner. You have Abner setting up his own king to rival the Lord's king. Abner is Saul's cousin, Saul's commander, and so understandably, I suppose, wants Saul's man on the throne, right? The son of Saul, Ishbosheth. Which, spoiler alert, Ishbosheth won't be in the story much longer. His days are short. Kind of glad it's a hard name to say. Ishbosheth, what does that name even mean? It's a strange name because the writer of 2 Samuel even kind of, I think, edits it a little. Because it literally means man of shame. Ish meaning man, Bosheth meaning shame. So what kind of terrible mom would name their child man of shame, right? Well, his other name isn't much better. In 2 Chronicles, his name is also referred to as man of Baal. So that's not much better. I think shame is kind of, I'd much rather prefer that. No, Baal could more literally kind of translates to my master, my Lord. Just as we call our God the Lord Adonai, Baal was kind of a pagan name referring to the Lord God Master, right? But still curious that they would have named him Ishbaal, man of Baal. That is the rival king to God's kingship. And I think it's so, I mean, the irony is not even veiled at all, right? That when we seek to rival God's kingship, it is to our shame. It is an idolatry. It is a rebellion against the true Lord Adonai, right? And that is what Abner is doing by setting up this rival king. Bearing out and showing with full display his idolatry, his shame as well. That's not the only other kind of fun with names here today. Talk to you about the significance of Hebron, this calling back to when Israel was small in just one family and calling back to God's promises to him. Where does Ishbosheth set up his kingship? Ishbosheth goes to Mahanaim. Hold for chuckles, right? Now, this is something I was not familiar with. Had to look up significance myself, what Mahanaim means. I keep wanting to call it Manaheim, which is like where my parents went to middle school. Mahanaim literally means two camps. Which again, the irony is not even thinly veiled here. What is Ishbosheth doing by rivaling King David? He is splitting Israel into two camps. Like literally and figuratively, right? And we're about to see the two camps again at this great battle that doesn't start off as a great battle. It's just these two forces come on one side of the pool of Gibeon and the other side of the pool of Gibeon. And it's Abner's great idea then. Well, let's not all get into this one big battle. Let's have a contest. There's a little battle of champions. It says, let us compete. It's almost like this kind of play. And it's not quite this 12-on-12 game. It's a little bit more vicious than that. It's a hand-to-hand combat. Each person, it says sword, but probably would have been like a short sword or a long stone dagger. That's all you have, just your hands and a dagger. And whoever champion is left standing, that side wins. But it's bloody, it's vicious. Each person kills the other. And all 24 men who have risen from both sides combined fall down death. So quickly, it becomes a dog-eat-dog fight out there. It is nasty, it is brutish, and short. How quickly, with Abner setting up this rival kingship, how quickly it is starting to spiral out of control into bitter brotherly bloodshed. You know, funny, it's not that funny. The peculiar thing about ancient warfare is I think we often think when you think about like the way you see battles in movies, that it's just one big game of Red Rover or dodgeball. Two sides just coming together and just kind of like pushing against each other, and it's this big kind of scrum. It almost looks like like a rugby scrum, right? So it's two battles coming together. But that was like maybe 5% of battles. The other 95% of battles was when the one side pushes back, then the other side just runs, right? Battles were much more about chasing people down. Whoever would balk first and start retreating and running away, the other side just fights. Side note that the Mongolians really conquered most of the world by pretending to retreat and then turning back. No one had a response to it. It was really kind of hilarious that no one could figure out. Anyway, the whole point being made is it's all about this kind of foot race, right? Where most of the bloodshed, where most of your casualties happen are in this retreat. And we hear one particular fatal foot race going on here between Asahel tearing after Abner. Asahel, which is kind of fun to say, Asahel, whose feet were swift as a gazelle. Again, not in the original Hebrew rhyming, right? But it bears through it. He would have had like the nickname Gazelle, which isn't like that cool of a nickname today. We call Tyreek Hill Cheetah, right? And that's kind of what we have here. We have Asahel just blasting off the line, chasing down Abner. No one can catch up to Asahel. And he's right on the heels of Abner. He just needs to put a little bit more gas in, and he's just going to take Abner down. And Abner is saying, back off. I don't want to have to kill you. Asahel he wants Abner's head, right? He's not going to move at all. And Abner's like, go, just find someone else. Loot someone else's body. I don't want to have to kill you. And Asahel's not budging at all. So Abner just hits the brakes. Just stops in his tracks, puts his spear out, maybe hoping just to knock the wind out of him. But he probably was not very good in physics class in ancient Israel, because he just stops, and with how fast Asahel's going, the butt of his spear, which would have a kind of polished point to it, tears right through Asahel and impales him, and he falls down dead. Quite a fatal, bloody foot race indeed. And Abner's men keep running on as Joab and his men go to pick up the fallen body of Asahel and mourn for him. And Abner, getting up to the top of the hill, calls out, telling him it's over. He has the high ground, and says, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" What self-righteousness Abner has here. What does he say? He gets to the top and says, "Come on, Joab, what? Give peace a chance, right? Why would you let all this brotherly bloodshed happen?" And Joab's response is, "Dude, this was your idea. You're the one who called out for this contest to happen down at the lake. Now you're the one who killed Asahel." And Abner's saying, "Hey, I gave him a chance to back off." And yet, from the cozy safety of standing up on that hill, Abner says, "I just wanted peace anyway. Look what you've done." He takes no responsibility. He takes no desire to be guided under the Lord's king of David. He rejects it. He's unwilling to accept it. He's unwilling to admit any ground to his enemies, unwilling to admit any responsibility. When we rival God's kingship, we are so often just setting ourselves up to be our own king, infallible, unable to be proved wrong, unwilling to give any ground, any moral uprightness to our enemies. And it's so much what I think kind of frames discourse today, right? You see the way people discuss online, in public debate, that you can't give your opponent, and you can't for one moment say, "Hey, you're actually right about that." You have to hold your position and be right all the time, not give them any ground, not even for a moment, because you must be the infallible king. There's no humility, no self-awareness. That is what it's like when we try to rival God's kingship rather than being guided by his rule. I didn't list this out as a point, but this is an application and a reflection point, looking at how David seeks to be led by God, guided by the kingship of God, and Abner seeking to rival it, and where that leads. Look at these paths, these choose your own adventure. If you choose the path of Abner, the one thing he's right about, the end will be bitter. The end will be bitter. The one thing that David shows us, being shaped by the kingship of God, is being guided by his promises and guided by his chesed love. And those are our paths before you. You don't need to skip ahead to cheat ahead to the page and see if you've made the right choice or not. It's right there for us. A bitter end or one dwelling in God's promised chesed love. As David does here, let us also seek to go back to God's promises first. May that be the first choice we make of going to his word and saying, God, what have you promised before? What have you made clear before? What have you revealed before me? And Lord, what character should we lead with? With that chesed, that loving kindness. Would our hearts be shaped by that? Pause and think for a moment. The path you're on, the choices you've made, the adventure you've set out, where is it going to lead? To an end of God's promises or a bitter end of bloody warfare? Hard to say right now. You probably don't have an answer to it. But it kind of begins with that first choice. Is it a choice shaped by submitting to God's kingship first, going to his promises? Or are you trying to rival it, trying to rival others, trying to compete against others, not willing to want to see their success, but to see your success first and foremost, over all others? And I think this gets hard because I don't think, Abner's such a bad guy, right? No one here is looking at this and saying, yeah, I'm a lot like Abner. None of us are impaling people going out for a jog. Good, right? But think about what we desire, what we try to rival at times. And I think for me, some of the hardest times in my life has been when I incline towards a hope, a dream, a desire so tightly that I don't want anything to get in the way between me and that dream. That all my prayers are simply, God, give me this, or God, you owe me that. How do I get this, God? And that's even particularly difficult in ministry too, I should say. Like, I want to be here and I want to be doing good things for the Lord's church, but if I get into my head and my own desires, just what I want that to look like, it'll just be shaped after mine and rivaling God's kingship rather than really seeking out, God, what has your word laid clear? The downward spiral of Abner, resisting and rivaling God, is most of all that the end it dehumanizes him. What I mean by that about the dehumanizing nature of that rivaling of God's king is more and more he looks less like a captain of a king and more like an ape fighting with other apes over a pool of water, right? They meet at this pool and they're just fighting tooth and nail over it. Hand-to-hand combat. He doesn't look like a blessed messenger. Blessed are his feet who brings good news. But an animal pursued by a gazelle who, through some shrewd trickery, wins out. When we rival God's reign, I think we behave less and less as we are created to be. More and more animalistic, just barking and biting at one another. Aristotle was indeed right when he said man is a political animal. We make our success and our kingship, right? Our reign and our rule as if we want to be the biggest ape around the lake, we look more and more like that. But what really helps us to be shaped into who we are meant to be shaped by the image of his son, Jesus Christ, into the image that we were created to be. But I want to say, I will get to, I guess, how that looks, but the challenge here as well is, look at David, right? He's made some good choices, holding that up, right? Good. He's submitting to God's kingship. That doesn't come without opposition, though. David's made all the right choices. There's still this rival Ishbosheth king in Israel. Abner is still warring against him. He did the right thing. He sought to bless others. He sought out God's promises. He's dealing chesed to those he would rule over, and he's still in civil war with an opposing king. I just want to say that opposition is not a sign of God, always a sign of God's disapproval. And also ease or prosperity are also not signs of God's displeasure. It's trying to read the effects into the decision. But the way we know God's pleasure or not is, have we made the decision saying, God, would my decision be based on your promises, on the truth of your gospel? What I'm doing, would the hope and dream of what I do not to make my name great, Lord, but to make your name great? Would what I do, Lord, be that which proclaims your Son's name the most? In my choice, am I able to do that in some capacity? Abner's path is a downward spiral of bloodshed and death, and David's one of chesed and blessings. We should ask, whatever choice we make, not, will that set me up well for the future? Not what are the choices that come after that? But Lord, will that enable me every day to seek your promises, the chesed love that we have in Jesus Christ? How do we find that kind of righteous life? That righteous path that David seems to find. Don't look to King David, but look to the king, not of Israel, but the king of heaven, who humbly followed the will of God the Father and came down. Not coming down to Hebron, the resting place of patriarchs, but the king of heaven came down to the birthplace of Israel's King David in Bethlehem. He didn't demonstrate his strength in a contest of hand-to-hand combat or speed in a foot race, but showed his might and his power by humbly healing by his miraculous hand, by teaching and living out the chesed love that brought him here in the first place. It is his work, it is his life and his death that guides you, that can shape you, that will make you into his image, into the humans we are created to be. Not descending the spiral of rivaling tribes and prides, but in his image alone. If you think about that choice, the choice to truly follow Christ, to be shaped by him, I think the thing that stops us most in making big choices for life is wondering, will I regret this later? I mean, is that why some of you struggle to make decisions? What if I regret this later? What if I come and live to regret it? What if I look back on my prior choice and I look at my life and say, well, look what good that got me. Look where I am now. That didn't do me any good. What does chesed get you? That loyal and stopping, never giving up love. What does that get you? Don't ask that. But rather, think about what Christ's. People would have looked at what Jesus and said. Because I can tell you exactly what the chesed of Jesus got him. Got him rejected by the very people he came to save. Torture, humiliation, death by the most painful execution ever made. That is what the chesed of Jesus got him. But sinner, look at what the loving kindness and steadfast love of Jesus got you. Look at the life, the promise, and the glory that is yours because of his love. To redeem you from that bitter end. Taking up his cross was not Jesus' bitter end. He rose again and reigns now because there is life, glorious, unending life in his name. He literally tells us to take up his cross and follow him. That is what his path and his journey and his adventure looks like for us. But the cross is not the end. To be guided, to be shaped by our King is an end that ends in sweet glory at his feet. Yes, it begins with a bloody start at the cross. That's just the beginning. And it was one of true glory and true beauty in heaven forever at his feet.